Good morning, everyone. I always get a little nervous when I hear these bios of myself. It's like, I now have to be as impressive as that sounded. But the reality is, it's just the summary of a long time spent in banking. And I am a few weeks out of that. But the perspective I'm going to share with you is that of a recovering banker. Because I have spent a very long time in a variety of organizations. I was with BNY Mellon for a long time before going to Qatar. Trying to figure out what this innovation thing means. What it means to the industry, what it means to the bank, what it means to our communities, to our customers, to our profitability. And what I can say after 10, 15 years of doing transformation style, innovation style work is that we've mostly been doing it wrong. We have spent a lot of time and a lot of money building playgrounds, innovation centers that look and feel different, that don't have the sort of metrics we have in the rest of the business, that are allowed to bring some of the things our speakers were speaking about yesterday, the agility, the flexibility, the possibility to make a mistake. And all of that is very, very good. However, it has come with a few assumptions or base rules that are actually not true. For instance, the innovation language we use in our banks is all about playing nice, ecosystem, collaboration, partnership. We come together and find a way for everyone to win. That's not actually true. The reason we are doing all of this is because we are feeling disruption coming our way. We know for a fact that the way we make money and the way we work is going to change, and we're trying to find a way through that disruption. So by definition, the time will come when we will stop playing nice. Not everyone will win. Not everyone is a right partner for everyone else. We will go after the same business as some of the people we're now nurturing. So what I want to spend some time on today is, how do we move away from the corporate playground? How do we still retain those feelings, those ways of working, that collaborative spirit, that freedom to think outside the box, because it is absolutely necessary, but move away from this situation that is great and uplifting, and you tend to have more fun when you go do POCs with your innovation team, but actually comes back to your desk and the core of your business. We don't do that by going to look at the startups and attend those innovation petting zoos and look at what other people do and go back to work. We do it by realizing that innovation is meant to keep us in business, not keep us at play. So we have to take a step back and say, there's a lot happening, and not all of it concerns us. And I mean, not all of it concerns us as businesses. And it is okay to look at the landscape and say, you know what? That's coming towards me. That bit I don't understand, so I need to spend some time. And that bit doesn't touch on me yet. Now, don't get complacent. The Netflix example we heard yesterday was very, very powerful. However, the danger we have in our industry is that we're waiting for the landscape to settle. I have spoken to so many boards, so many decision makers who are very, very good at what they do, and say, well, I can't tell you which way I'm going to go right now, because there's so much going on that their potential directions of travel are so plentiful that I can't commit. So I'm going to wait for things to settle, and we don't have that time. But we don't have the resources to go after everything either. That's why it feels uncomfortable, that's why it feels stressful. But if we take a moment and say that disruption only matters if it's personal, then at least we can narrow down a bit. You know, you weren't talking about Netflix any more than Time Warner were. You were right not to. So what disruption are we talking about here? Anything that touches your profitability. So technology that means that the way you deliver services can and will change in a way that will eventually have your customers saying, I'm not going to pay as much, you're doing less. Hold on to that, we'll come back to it later. It could also mean competition that comes in and does what you do with a lower margin. That's happening in retail banking a lot. Those businesses are not necessarily profitable themselves, but it doesn't matter, they change the story. We'll talk about that again in a second. And the last piece, but not least, is skill set. Again, it was touched in one of the presentations yesterday, but one of the biggest challenges at the personal level, not the organizational level, but at the personal decision-making level, is that a lot of this stuff we don't know how to do. And a lot of what we have gotten good at to get to the jobs we have today doesn't equip us for what needs to happen next. So disruption hits on those three levels, and it hits at the same time. And human, understandable, we try to deal with it by putting these layers, the innovation petting zoos and the playgrounds. However, while we're doing that, technology capabilities that have become commercially available over the last few years mean that the stuff we used to do is unbundling. Now, I know we've used that word a lot. Every banker in the room has used that word extensively over the last few years. So I'm not going to spend time explaining why it happens and how it happens. I want to take a moment, though, to say that unbundling is incidental. No one is out to get you. But they're getting you anyway. And the reason they're getting you is that there are companies out there unburdened by legacy who are exploring the art of the possible, who know what is now commercially available, what is easy to build and use, and they're using it to get to clients in a way that is fast and cheap for them. Invariably using existing banking infrastructure, if we're talking about banking players. And that was not something we were warned about. That was not something we were prepared for. The fact that these technology capabilities could be used by people who will compete on a very, very narrow vertical, on our rails, on our infrastructure, disintermediating us, unbundling what we do, and all those scary words, but actually doing so in a way that is fully symbiotic, just not very welcome. But the third piece here that is worth mentioning is that all of these entities are riding the regulatory wave, right? When I started my career, it wasn't a concern because the barriers to entry were so high. What we're seeing is a tide turning all over Europe, definitely with open banking in Australia pointing that direction, Singapore, increasingly Hong Kong, not everywhere, but it's pointing to a very specific direction, which is greater openness. It's a belief that the technology that is now available should be used, and that the way we used to make money is not necessarily protected anymore. What each regulation will look like when it lands differs. But that direction of travel is becoming very, very clear. So for those reasons, what we experience as unbundling is happening. The people who are unbundling us are not necessarily going after the big banks. Some are like, I'm going to get you. But the vast majority aren't. They're just making the most of a business opportunity. But what is interesting to take away is that you're not looking for the winners. The people who are transforming the way you do business might not survive themselves. And I know I've had this conversation a million times, and I will have it a million times still. We are looking at this extremely busy landscape, trying to pick the thing that will win, the safe bet, the technology that will be the one thing that we can focus on, the startup that will transform everything. And the reality is, that might happen, but while we're waiting for that to happen, this is happening. This is affectionately known as the attack on the homepage. One is HSBC, the other one is a hotel. It doesn't even matter what all of these guys do, but if you're interested, we can talk about it later. What matters is how that feels if you are HSBC. You are seeing a number of entities coming for very narrow verticals, competing on price, competing on customer experience. And the question, where do I even begin with this, is a very human and very natural one, because at the same time as trying to understand what these guys do and who they are, you're running a business. You're dealing with day-to-day opportunities, you're dealing with day-to-day challenges, you're firefighting at least half of your day, and this is happening in the background. Quite a lot of these businesses are not profitable. Quite a lot of these businesses will not survive. But what they do to client expectations and regulatory appetite will survive, which is why it's extremely dangerous to wait for the thing that will be successful to land, because meanwhile, this is changing the conversation. Now, I'm very anti looking for the Airbnb of, or the Uber of, and the reason for that is that if you can see Airbnb, it's just one of those multitude of entities on there. It's the one we've cottoned on to, it's the one we potentially use the most, it's the one that we understand exactly the kind of challenge it presents, but it's only one of many. So don't look for a winner a priori, because the thing we need to take away is this. It feels like an assault, but it's just change. It's just technology coming our way, changing the way we do business. And from a banking perspective, I personally believe there are three options. Running an innovation lab with a multitude of experiments could coexist with all three of them, but actually isn't one of them. I did an executive offsite a few weeks ago with a company that has actually put a lot of money and run a lot of very successful experiments. And towards the end of the session, there was a moment of realization when the CFO said, "It's not finished, is it? We have just gotten comfortable with running experiments and learning and releasing these into the wild, and now we're realizing it was just a stepping stone to transforming the way we work. The experiments were not the thing. The thing is how you do new business." And the truth is, these are the options, right? One is carry on doing what you do. You can keep doing it. You're profitable. If you weren't profitable, you wouldn't be here. You're seeing change, you're seeing challenge. You can choose to take it on or ride out the current model. I'll get back to that in a second. The second one is accept that this disintermediation thing will keep happening, but nobody's trying to do the really complicated stuff. No one is going into the plumbing, and there is value and necessity there. And the third one is, okay, disruption has happened. Let's go out and make some new money. So what do those options look like? Let me go back to what I said at the beginning. Disruption is personal. So what you need to take away from this conversation, what we all need to take away from this conversation, is what is happening in the market that separates what you do, what the client gets, and how you get paid. So let me give you an example from my previous life. I spent a lot of time in custody with all the fun kids. And one of the biggest challenges for custodian banks is that when the whole API conversations started taking place with customers, we will now provide you an API infrastructure. It's going to give you real-time access to your data. We can do all these cool things on top of it. Clients loved it. And then after a while, they were like, okay, but we're going to need to renegotiate because you did all of those reports effectively manually, and now you don't. So let's talk about what I get, check, what you do, less, and how you get paid. That's when that conversation matters. So there is an option to continue making old money the way you used to. I had a conversation with a treasurer not so long ago who said, I'm okay to be a dinosaur. I will ride this out for as long as I can make money like this and then let someone else figure it out. Not how I would want to live, but he slept at night more than quite a lot of his colleagues who were trying to keep old and new together. Now that option is there. It's not exciting, it's not sexy, it will not make headlines, but it's there. The one thing to remember is that option is not very cheap anymore. Particularly with regulation pushing a certain way, minimum compliance tends to be quite expensive. So PSD2 hit Europe, and there were endless meetings for about 2 years on how can we do this? We should comply, but we should make money on top of it, but I don't know how to make money on top of it, so let's have another meeting. And what happened is most people decided to keep their options open, keep making money the old way, put infrastructure in place that will allow us compliance and give us a little bit more time to figure out how to make money. That's more expensive than taking a punt and doing it a different way, because essentially you're building your infrastructure twice. So if you ask me, in Europe at least, the regulator is making it very clear that they don't want old money the old way for much longer. But you can look at your jurisdictions and take a temperature of that, of where the regulator is pushing you and what the appetite inside your organization is. Because as we'll see in the final section of this, it's hard. The transition is hard. It's much harder than painting the walls a funky color and getting some beanbags, right? But before we get there, the second option is my favorite, and the one no banker willingly agrees to, and I don't know why. I had this conversation with custodians, with fund accountants, with insurers who are like, no, we don't want to be plumbers. Why not? The innovation we're looking at in our entire industry is premised on the assumption that someone will provide the rails, and that those rails will be future-proof, data-enabled, and capable of dealing with the type of capabilities we're looking at. This may not be sexy, but it is absolutely essential. And the rest of what's happening in the industry is assuming that someone will be providing this. For now, people are providing this because they always used to, because it's expected. But I don't see yet, particularly not in Europe, an urge from some of the providers saying, you know what, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this well. It's a scale play. It's not a margin play, but it is one that could put you in a very, very good position. And I'll touch on it again in a second. What it isn't is a safe bet, because there aren't any of those. And again, I have some faces falling when I have this conversation, particularly with boards, because there seems to be this sort of moral offset that if I pick the boring thing, it will be safe, and it isn't. You don't need as many of these providers. It will get highly competitive for a time before it settles in. It needs commitment. It needs a choice. I'll sit back and allow the choice to be made for me play is not safe. The third option is new money. This is a goat. This goat is an asset. There's a company called Stellar. It is the other Ripple, if you're familiar with Ripple. Same founders, very similar technology. They split. Stellar is a not-for-profit. And they've gone into markets like Nicaragua. And they've looked at how people behave and what they have need for. And they have created, essentially, banking capabilities without banks. So this is a collateralized goat. It's collectively owned in the community, and when I need to borrow, I don't give you my goat. I have a token, and there you go. The reason I use the goat, other than I love the story, is that no bank thought of that. And when we're talking about creating new assets, about really playing to win in this innovation game, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about funky UX. We're not talking about revamping the app. All of that is hygiene. If we want to make new money in this new regulatory environment, in this new technical environment, this is the kind of imagination we need to have. And going back to the original disruption piece, we don't necessarily have these skill sets in our organizations. We don't know how to do this. The reason it blew my mind when I heard about the collateralized goat is that I had spent the previous 15 years in banking IT, and nobody ever thought of that, even though we had people working on DLT in the room. So how do you put yourself in this position? The realization is you're going to need new ways of working. You're going to need a very clear sense of where you want to play as a leadership team, but you're also going to need partners. You're going to need partners across all three of those. And we're not very good at partnering in banks. We're very good at buying from. We're very good at selling to. We're very good at having relationships that repeat. But we're not very good at partnering in a way that includes vulnerability. So I'm very good at this, but I'm really not very good at that. And you're very good at that. So let's get together and be more than the sum of our parts. This is not something we have historically been very good at. And this is the kind of partnering we're talking about. And this is the kind of partnering that we need to explore no matter which of the paths we follow. So if you go old money, new regulation, you're going to need to think about this. If you think utility, you're going to need to think about this. And if you think new money, goats, you're going to need to think about this. And the way we historically partner is we do the light touch, high jazz hands partnerships, where there's not much integration, there's not much competition, you can have a press release and then go very quiet about it. And we have the partnerships where we go all out and we white label, we sort of essentially outsource the learning. This is complicated, you do it, I'll just slap my logo on top. And what I'm saying here is that the relative technical and business debt acquired is actually reversed to the effort. So when we're looking at partnership, the only way to determine what's right for you, it's where you're going with your business. The hard decisions about which of the paths you're going to follow, where you're going to play, and how you're going to get there. Because the reality is, the pretty partnerships, the ones that are easy to roll out, come with a heavy debt. You waste time. You haven't changed your business model by partnering with someone on the surface. The ones that come closer to the core are more expensive, take more time, but they are actually better at getting you along the way. You need to make some choices about where you're going to partner, and you can't treat the light partnerships as a way to buy time, because that doesn't exist. You're accumulating a heavy debt in doing that. And what we're seeing a lot, particularly in Europe, is that a lot of the partnerships banks go for are with vampires, are with people whose fundamental purpose is to take a part of your business away from you. And for some reason, we've spent some time going into business with these people thinking it's going to look good in the press release. So MasterCard were the first people to pay into Revolut. Revolut fundamentally undermines the way that the profitability structure of MasterCard works on the merchant fee by splitting that. We all know how that story evolved. When I was still at BNY Mellon, we had a couple of companies working in the DLT space that came to us and said, hi, you have 75% of the repo market. I can find a way to make that much less profitable and much more accessible for the customer, and I'll do it with or without you. And we said, oh, well, let's do it together. No, you want to take out my business? You do it without me. Competition is fine. We've dealt with it for a very, very long time. Do not partner with vampires. Talk about money. Talk about money early. And I don't just mean the money exchanging hands. I mean, how do you make money? Because if the way you make money is taking away my money, we might have a problem. It's a vanilla competition, even if they look different. The other thing to remember is the cheese sandwich conundrum. I worked with these soldiers in my first job out of college, and they were all rowers. And they said that the way to figure out if a rower is contributing to the team is to time the boat with everyone rowing, and then swap each of the rowers out and replace them with a cheese sandwich. If the cheese sandwich makes the boat go faster than you, you may be rowing hard, but you're not contributing. A lot of the partnerships we see are cheese sandwiches. They don't hurt, they don't add to anything. And if you're a business trying to increase profitability, you do not need cheese sandwiches any more than you need vampires. They're less bad for you, but we're playing for time now. So cheese sandwiches are time wasters. What we need to figure out is which of the paths you're going for, where does this disruption thing strike your business, what's the appetite internally to actually go for it. There's no shame in not having that appetite, but there's a lot of tension in going for it when you don't have the appetite. And then when you've decided all of those things and decided how far you want to partner, you take a step back and go, okay, this technology has hit. I need to build an organization that can talk to the world, to deliver my purpose, not in general. And a lot of companies don't do that because they look at the first bit and go, infrastructure, APIs, build stuff, and forget to have the business conversation, which is information needs to go from A to B and be intelligible and actionable. That's a business conversation, not an IT conversation. And we're not having enough of that conversation because our data is in spreadsheets, and it's not in a position to be exposed, and we have timelines, and we have deadlines, and we're missing the most important conversation of all, which is, if this information has to go from me to you, I need to know how you're going to use it. I need to know how we align for purpose and profitability, and build to that. First the business, then the build. The reason the business has to come first, and for all of you who are going through this transformation, you already know this, is that there's a lot of technical stuff that has to happen, and the technical stuff will take over. System interfaces and a lot of analysis and a lot of building, and your IT guys will love this. But you're not necessarily needed in the room for a lot of this, although they'll come back to you for more budget sign-offs quite regularly. But they need to have been told which way we're going and why. I have worked as an advisor or an employee in more organizations than I care to count that started here. In one particular example, we built the whole thing in IT and then went, ta-da! And the business absolutely hated it. Not because it wasn't good, it was a thing of beauty. It's the best infrastructure I ever had the pleasure of working with. But because we had not had the conversation of how do you make money, and how do you think you will make money tomorrow? We had built to technical capability. It's not unusual, it's happening a lot. So these conversations need to happen, right? Legacy is not just about technology. It's about how you work. It's about how you interpreted regulation in the past. It's about how you've set up products with customers. It's about this guy, Dave. This guy, Dave, is a real person. This guy, Dave, is how I landed my first gig at Deutsche Bank. Because this guy, Dave, was in charge of all the pricing alignments for the FX middle office at Deutsche Bank about 18 years ago, and he resigned. No one could understand the macros in the spreadsheet that he used, and this guy, Dave, left Deutsche Bank with such a big challenge that myself and my tiny little startup at the time were hired in to reverse engineer the spreadsheet. If I could tell you that Daves no longer exist because the digital era is here, I would be lying to you. So you need to deal with this guy, Dave. A lot of your information is on spreadsheets. A lot of the good stuff that happens on top of your information is in spreadsheets. Putting an API on top won't work. And you need to understand why this guy, Dave, is working on spreadsheets. What is it that he does? And do you need that thing for the future? You also need to start hiring people that you can't interview because you have no idea what they do. So how do you start putting an organization in place that knows how to do this? Again, partnership is a big thing. Coming out of a comfort zone is a big thing. And while you're doing all of that, you need to keep your business running and you need to guess what comes next, right? Because we've got a lot of plates spinning. You need to choose where you're going to land. So there's some good news here, right? You need to work to standards. You don't need to make this stuff up. Particularly when we're talking about open banking, there are certain things that are being established at an industry level that will set the pace and the direction. That is actually very good news when you're trying to figure out what to do. You're going to need to accept that the world has moved in a certain direction. I have just come from a region that hears cloud and runs out of the room, into a region that has forgotten that 5 years ago we had that exact conversation. Today's cloud, tomorrow it will be something else. The comfort to be having this conversation is very important. Nothing is forever. And if you remember one thing out of this conversation is that you're not going to get that answer. And if you wait for it, you're going to waste precious time. Everything has to be modular. Everything has to be built on the assumption that your business needs might change and the technology will change. And it will change fast. So how do you build for modularity? Well, you build for purpose, and you get the clever kids in to build an infrastructure that can be plugged out, chucked out, and replaced. And that is possible. And it's not more expensive in terms of build and maintenance. It's slightly more expensive in terms of the people who run it. But that's okay, because the cost of ownership is lower, which is good news for our controllers in the room, right? But all of this is exhausting, and it's expensive. And it creates tensions because you will have people in your organization who feel, rightly so, that what they do for a living is becoming irrelevant. And you will have to deal with the humans while you're dealing with the cost and transformation strain, while you're dealing with running your current business. So make sure that you're doing it on the front foot. Business focus is the most important thing and the thing that is lacking the most in transformation efforts. We'll do it, we'll catch up, we'll catch our breath, and then decide which way we're going does not work. Because it's expensive and it's exhausting, but also because the tipping points are not where you expect them to be. I have seen organizations that spend hundreds of millions of dollars in building a new infrastructure, and when it went live, people went, okay, let's move on to the next thing. And then they stopped funding their APIs and it fell over. The tipping points are not where you expect them to be. Therefore, the business focus needs to drive everything. It's not about delivering the technology and then going back to normal. It is not about delivering to the latest regulatory piece and then going back to normal. Even if you've decided to do old money the old way, your tipping points are new. So you need to have a very honest conversation with your team, because the reality is, and we saw that with open banking in the UK, a lot of cost, a lot of stress, a lot of 5-hour risk committees, and then the day after, nothing happened. And we were so disappointed. We expected a big bang, we expected a stampede, no, nothing happened. Nothing happened, and because the vast majority of organizations had not done it because they wanted to, but they had done it because everyone else was doing it, it was like, well, okay, now that junior guy will get to run that and I'll go do it, my real business. And the danger of that is that time passes, we create distractions for ourselves that are very expensive and don't do much. A lot of Me Too marketing. I have seen 7 smart bonds on the blockchain over the last 5 years. Not one has gone live. It won't. But it's expensive. It's time and resources and headspace you're not spending on your business viability. So all of that wastes time. It's expensive. It's exhausting. It creates an illusion of movement. And the danger is that you are left with what you're left with without having made a choice, very much to the point that was being made yesterday by our last speaker. Whatever you choose, make a choice. Don't allow this to happen to you. There is nothing as demoralizing as teams that work exceptionally hard trying to keep a million plates spinning, realizing that the most important choices about their business are being taken away from them. Now, for those of you who've come across my company before, you know that we're firm believers that this journey is only 1% finished. People have made a lot of mistakes. A lot of what has been built is not reusable. A lot of what we've done so far is warming up. So if everything I've been saying has made you go, oh my God, rejoice. There is time. There is no one who is significantly ahead of anyone else in cracking the business piece. However, it's a window, it's not a runway. And the opportunity to make the choices and move on the front foot does not translate to getting everything right. It translates to doing things on purpose and with purpose and for the right reasons. I have no more to tell, but I would love to hear your thoughts and any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Leda. Thank you. Very interesting talk. Were there any questions from the floor?
Nothing? Where are all the people who are like, I'm going to hit you with a hard question?
Have we got any questions on Pigeonhole Live that have been submitted? No? We're just digesting everything you've told us this morning. Yes? I think there's a roaming mic. Okay. Oh, here we go.
If you had one bet to make, what would it be?
Technology bet or business bet? Either? Only one. You want one? I would change the core banking infrastructure when I still have the choice to do so, and it's not something that I'm forced to do. I would go to the messiest, ugliest, and most thankless piece of transformation and attack my core banking first. It has not been a popular view when I aired it to my CTOs over the years. The advantage is no one has really tried it, so I'm safe. It hasn't been tested. Anything else?
Yes, just at the back there. Could you just say your name, please, and the company you're from?
I'm Rashu. I'm from Cascal. It was an interesting experience from London to Qatar to Australia, Singapore. What's the major differences you see between Europe style of business and Australia, if there's anything you've noticed, where we are in the journey?
It's a very good question. So I think it's fair to say that particularly in banking, we've left our pioneering days behind us. I mean, if you look at where the banking industry started, it was highly opportunistic, highly creative, but we're talking like 200 years ago. And we have become an industry of experts and risk committees, which is absolutely fine, but it doesn't play well with where we are now. And what I have seen is that nobody, and I mean nobody, has entered this journey willingly. Nobody sat there and said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change everything. So what is interesting and different in those markets is what the impetus for change is. In the UK context and more widely the European context, it was realistically regulation. Because the barrier to entry was removed and the reality of genuine competition changed. The second dynamic that played with this was the fact that in doing cosmetic innovation and playing around with things, people accidentally stumbled upon things that were both profitable and useful. And that changed the conversation for everyone else, because the minute that one of your direct competitors ups the game, then you have to at least meet that. Which means that the regulatory trend and some genuine, albeit slow competition sets the tone in the European market. In the Middle Eastern markets, none of that exists. And you're in a situation where you almost have guaranteed business because of how the sort of oil-based economies work, which means that you don't have that competitive urge that these guys are doing better than me and eating my lunch, because that's not how the pie is distributed. The question becomes, do you do it as a hygiene factor, and when does that pressure point come on? So I think Australia is somewhere in the middle in terms of not having an overpopulated banking sector that creates a certain emotional stability, shall we say, and the fact that with open banking coming and spotlights on Australian banking more than ever before, all it will take is the regulator to put the pedal down a little bit more, and one of the big banks to say, I'm gonna just go out with this to accelerate everything. But it has to be either because you have to or because you make money with it. It's the having to that usually sets people on the journey, and the minute someone starts making money, everyone else follows. I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you very much.